Hey all, and welcome to today's panel. This is a really interesting one. It is how to use disabilities to write interesting characters. There are a lot of people in the world with disabilities, whether it's a physical disability like a missing limb or fibromyalgia or something, or even psychological or neurological disabilities. And they can actually make for very interesting characters: heroes, villains, protagonists, anti-heroes, antagonists, whatever. So it's an interesting topic. I got some author friends to talk about it. Why don't you guys say hello, starting with Spencer?
Hi, my name is Spencer Pearson. I am very interested in this subject. I wanted to write about some characters with disabilities, and I think I've succeeded a little bit about that. I wrote the Glimmer Steel Saga, and I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. EM.
My name is E.M. Whitaker, and I wrote the book Turbulence. The reason I wanted to be on this panel is because my main character actually suffers from a genetic mutation. So I have went into different aspects of mental illness with certain characters.
That's awesome. Mary, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Well, I actually never planned to be an author. I am a civil rights lawyer by training and a social service worker by occupational history, and I wrote an author once. I wrote a fan letter and said, hey, you wrote this great secondary character, can you write some more? And I became a beta reader, and she said, you're really good about writing plots and story ideas, you should write your own. So I did, and that was 17 books ago.
Wow.
So
Congratulations.
My unique sort of niche is to write characters with differences, whether it be disability or body type or age, or something that makes a character different. And I did it out of self-defense because I was tired of reading about characters that were supposed to be like me, but were characters with disabilities who were angry and dark and just bitter about life, or were miraculously healed by the 8th chapter. And that's not how disability works. I'm married, I've got 2 kids, I went to law school. We live regular lives, and I wanted to see that reflected in fiction, so that's why I became an author.
Awesome. Matt.
Hi, Matt Posner, author of the School of the Ages series and a number of other books, including How to Write Dialogue, a Manual for Writers, and my recent novel about professional wrestling, Squared Circle Blues. So my interest in disability comes from having worked in special education, and where I've worked with primarily students who had emotional disabilities or learning disabilities. And so when it comes time to talk about how I've done that, I'm going to mention a character that I have who has Asperger's and a huge magical power. That's coming up.
That sounds pretty cool. Kelly, why don't you tell us about yourself?
I started way back in high school when I became a professional reader for the blind students, and I read for the blind for about 25 years. And the professor that I worked for at San Francisco State actually taught teachers how to work with students who had disabilities, and I went with her to a lot of the symposiums and things like that. So I picked up a lot of information on what students who have visual impairments are like, and also other disabilities. We also have several people who are disabled in my family, so I've had a lot of experience with lots of different kinds of disabilities.
That's interesting. Okay, well, I wanted to divide this panel, let's say, into 2 general themes. The first one is writing a disability without it being a disability. For example, in Joe Abercrombie's Half a King book, the Shattered Sea series, he writes a character who has half a hand. It's like a withered, stumpy thing. And it does, obviously, because it is a disability, it does crop up. He can't pull an oar, he can't wield a sword, we carry a shield, things like that. But the disability doesn't define the character as much. There is some element to it. Do you know of any other characters like that who have a disability but are not defined by it?
I have one of my characters that he had his hand cut off, similar situation. And I really made a lot of effort to make sure that I didn't focus on the disability of that. He's trying to find his balance point. He's going to do everything he can to just have a normal life. So that's, I mean, you're still going to have aspects to it that are going to throw him off sometimes here or there, but he's not going to be jumping around moaning about his hand and et cetera, et cetera. He's just going to do what he needs to do as much as he can with what he's got.
And what
So
kind
yeah, I think that's very important.
what kind of character is he? It's a fantasy, sci-fi, warrior, scholar?
It's a fantasy. He's actually a doctor and a warrior, which of course gives him problems in both realms. And he's the antagonist in the first book.
Interesting. So I guess in a way the disability does interfere with the warrior side of him, so he kind of focuses more on the doctor, I guess.
Well, because he has to learn how to use his weapon in his other hand, but he has some attachments to the hand that got cut off, so he can use the dagger, but it's still not going to be exactly the same thing. But again, it's not a focus of, oh, his dagger hand is gone, his hand is gone, his hand is gone. It's not like that. It's just he still does whatever he has to do. It's just whenever he has to do something that might involve both hands, the description of how does he manage to do it without both hands comes into play. So that's how it's downplayed as much as possible, but I try not to make it inconsequential. So it's difficult. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I have a character in one of my I write contemporary romance, and one of my characters is a wounded warrior who lost a limb due to an improvised explosive device, and following actual military programs, he tried to go back and do some service in the National Guard and had some problems with his prosthetic device and pressure sores, and was, discharged because of that, and struggled with his decision to do that because he felt like he left his team behind, and decided to go back and work for his commanding officer at his ranch and work with horses, which he really did. But his struggle is more about, is he giving up on his team, and is he really doing what he wants to do, even though he loves working with the horses and he's really gifted with that? Is that really what his destiny is, and who is he letting down, and who is he helping, and those kind of psychological challenges of having to reinvent who you are when your body just basically says, screw you, I quit. Through no fault of your own. Like many of us who have disabilities, that's what happens when you have to change who you are because your body, gives up on you when you've got other plans. And so I didn't spend a whole lot of time on, when he lost his limb and the struggles around that, but more the aftermath of having to change his own definition of who he is as a man, and who he is in the Army, and who he is in the command structure, and who he is as a lover, a partner, and a supporter, and all of those challenges. So it's a difficult dynamic to write, but those are real life struggles, and it doesn't mean that he doesn't fall in love and he doesn't have a life. It just means he has a different life than he envisioned for himself.
Interesting. So in a way, there was that focus on the disability, but in that he has to adapt. I mean, I know a lot of my author friends, the people that I've been interacting with online, a lot of the people who've come into these panels, they're authors because of some disability. Some of them have fibromyalgia or chronic pain that stops them from working. So they spend a lot of time at home and they need that creative outlet. And so in a way, it's sort of like that, like the real life story of the people who have a disability and yet find a way to move on
Right.
with their lives.
Absolutely.
That's good. Now, physical disabilities aside, what about the emotional, psychological, mental, things like that? EM, you mentioned that one of your characters had something like that?
Yeah, I focus on those sort of aspects because everybody has them. But my main character, like I was saying before, has this genetic mutation where she paralyzes people. So naturally, she's afraid to touch people. Now, I went into where not only is she afraid to touch people, but she is afraid to be touched because she doesn't want to let people know or get close, or she wants that barrier. So that's one thing that I incorporated in the partnership aspect, is this person is trying to get close and she's just trying to put up this wall.
Very interesting. Kelly, do you add any of your writings? Have you written a character like that with a physical or a mental disability and done it?
Most of my characters tend to be just plain crazy, but I love reading about characters who have disabilities, who have overcome them. And one of the things that I like best is that they are just regular people. They go through all the same things that anybody else does. The disability does not define them at all. It just is, some extra little step that they need to take before they get up in the morning. Like in Clive Cussler's Oregon Files series, Juan Cabrillo, the captain of the ship, actually he calls himself the CEO, or the chairman, he has to get up and strap on his leg before he starts his day. Sometimes he'll just hop around. But that's just, one extra little thing that they need to do to keep functioning. If the character becomes disabled during the story, I really hate it when they just go on and deal with it. They really need to go through all the different stages of grief. It's the same thing losing an arm or a leg as it is losing somebody that you love and grieving for that person. And we went through that with my sister-in-law when she lost her arm to cancer. And she dealt with it for about 6 months, and then she said, all right, that's enough. I'm done. I've got one arm. Let's keep going. And now you can't slow her down. She's just, she still works as a physical therapist. She still rides bikes with her kids and does mountain climbing and skiing and is very active. And you would not know that she only has one arm because she is so active. It's hard to get her to stand still long enough to notice. And it's that inner spirit that you have to write, that inner spirit that continues to be active and continues to live the life normally with just, a small thing that they need to overcome or that slows them down a little bit in some situations.
Interesting. That's an interesting comparison. Like, when you write, fantasy is my genre, so it's all the experience I've got. You write the death of a loved one, whether it's the spouse or the son or the parent or someone, that you give the character that sorrow to deepen them. You do have to emphasize the development that comes about as a result of that loss. So it's an interesting thought that using disability, whether it's the loss of a limb or whether it's a change in their physical ability, using that sort of as through the 5 stages of grief and approaching it from that same angle. I like that. Very clever.
But the corollary to that too is that disability does not make you more heroic. It does not make you less of a jerk if you're predisposed to be a jerk. And then also, don't fix the person halfway through your book if that's not the type of disability that they've got, just because it's a great plot device to make them better. If they're prone to depression or diabetes or whatever the disability is, if it's not consistent with that disability, don't fix them, because that's not true. That's not authentic. That's not how life works. Now, in your genre where it's fantasy, okay, go ahead and do that. But if you write contemporary fiction or young adult or whatever, and someone's got type 1 diabetes, they're not going to get better. You know?
Yeah, that's very true.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Okay, so because I think what I want to say is going to build on what Mary said. In my second School of the Ages novel, which is called Level 3's Dream, I have a character who has Asperger's, and for those who aren't familiar with that, Asperger's is a form of autism which causes you to be very focused on and very good at a certain thing of interest, but to have inability to understand the emotions of others. So I took a character who was like that. He's a young magician. He also goes around in a wheelchair. And he has special power, which is that he can put you into a mental dream space, let's say. That's why it's called Level 3's Dream. So my young characters are assigned to help him because he keeps doing that to people, and it makes him dangerous. So, he'll be like, oh, I'm mad at you. I didn't like what you said. Get in my head. So in the course of all this, they've got to stop him. But then there's the thing. You can't make the Asperger's go away. You can't make the power go away. So how are they going to make this kid able to adjust? And so the end result is they discover that he has a psychological trauma. And that they heal the psychological trauma, he remains who he is. He still has the power. He still has Asperger's. He says, well, I was born this way. This is who I am. And it is ultimately affirmed at the end. As a matter of fact, I go a little further and I show that people who have Asperger's or other autism may have it like a kind of a different mental or psychic connection than other people do. So we're not getting rid of the disability. We got rid of a trauma, which is okay to heal. And the person's actual identity is not only affirmed, but actually promoted as this is a good thing. And there's another person who has some more conventional type of autism who also gets that same kind of a boost. So that's what I want. The characters are defined by it, but there isn't the sense that it needs to be healed. The sense is this is who they are, so let's find something else to work on to make them grow as characters the way everybody has to.
Yeah. I was going back to something Mary said. I wrote this short story about a fantasy soldier with PTSD. And, in a fantasy world, there's no psychologists, no psychiatrists to fix to deal with the PTSD. So it was an interesting experiment in seeing how fantasy soldiers would view their trauma, whether they would see it as cowardice or, however they would go with it. And in talking to people who deal with PTSD, both military-related PTSD and then other non-war scenario-based PTSD, it was interesting in that, it's very rare that you ever get over it. Like Mary was saying, type 1 diabetes, you don't get over because it's a genetic condition. PTSD is a psychological trauma that is imprinted on your brain that you never really get over. So the ending of the story wasn't that he dealt with his PTSD. There was some sort of forward movement in his life. He sort of came to terms with certain elements of the things that traumatized him, but he's not fixed. And I think that's something that a lot of people will agree with, is that, like Mary said, don't fix them. Going back to Matt's thing, give them a little something, give them hope for the future, give them steps of progress that will make people feel, okay, the readers, they'll say, okay, I feel good about this character. He's made progress, personal growth in whatever, but he hasn't been changed. And so I think that's a good approach to writing a disabled character. Now let's take it to the other side of things. In one of my stories, I also wrote about a character with autism, but a very, very severe case of autism where he's basically non-communicative. He speaks in one-word sentences. He has a bunch of things, but the autism is paired with a sensory perception disorder that allows him to see colors differently. It was just an interesting thing where the gods basically are sending him messages through the colors that he sees. So it's sort of using it as a power. And EM, you mentioned that your character had a mutation, a genetic mutation that gave her powers.
Not really power so much, but I wanted to touch on something that Mary and Matt were saying before, and that there's another end of the spectrum when you write about disability, which is somebody could write about a character who is so shielded that they have become defined by it because everyone else has basically shaped them from this disability. At the beginning of the first book, that's what happens to the main character. All her friends and her family are afraid to let her do anything. So when she meets these people and they're trying to get her to act for herself instead of relying and hiding behind everybody, that is the kind of thing that I don't really see much in stories, where you can actually see the character grow. It's either they magically get over it, they're magically healed, or they just kind of use it as a cool plot device and then it's gone.
Very
Like bipolar is a very known thing for that in ADHD, to explain spastic moments, or when people are like super angry, they just use that as an example and then it goes away. Nobody explains the mechanics of how this is within the story or within the character's core.
Or it's
And that
super
really
popular.
gets to me.
It's super popular in like urban fantasy to give the magical character ADHD or ADD or bipolar disorder to explain the magical. Like I think in The Magicians, the TV show and the books, they used that. The main character had ADD.
Yeah, that turned me off when I tried reading it.
Yeah. So I think that's like a lot of these disorders, people just sort of lean on them because they're easy, like sociopathy or psychopathy. When you say psychopath, people are scared, without actually understanding what makes a psychopath tick or how they're different from sociopaths or the way they actually act. The characters end up, like EM says, just kind of turning you off because they're not real.
It's like they use the anger thing for maybe 5 minutes to explain he lifted a tree. Okay, why did he lift the tree? All right, is he like some sort of magical animal that can magically lift things? Or, you know, why is he throwing a truck at somebody? And then next thing you know, he's just acting normal. You know, there's no mood imbalance, there's none of the depression, no talk about medication, none of that. I actually went into it with one of the other characters where he does suffer from PTSD because of an event that happened in his life. And there's a section in there where literally the guy was on house arrest, he did not get his medication, and he went completely postal on somebody. So that's usually what happens when people with psychiatric meds do not have them for a long period of time. That's a realistic scenario. They do stupid things. They act impulsive. I mean, not to the extent of shooting somebody in a hospital, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
The example is real.
But and that's a common thing that I see in contemporary romance and women's fiction and that kind of thing is they will mention a disability but then forget to follow through with what that disability, psychiatric or emotional or physical, the impact that it has on all the rest of the relationships within the story. Because if you have attention deficit disorder or sensory integration dysfunction or autism or depression, all of those things impact all of the other relationships in your life. And so you need to address that within your story. And if you don't, the disability becomes a plot device and not an authentic part of your story, and it doesn't read well. And so as authors, we need to make sure that if we're going to go down the route of diversity and inclusiveness, we need to do more than just list the disabilities so it pops up as a keyword, because that's not what we're here for. We're here to, at least I am, here to help make disability, I hate to say normalized, but something that's not like, ooh, this is something special, because it's not, because we all deal with these challenges. Just something that isn't atypical in fiction or literature anymore. It just is. Just like hair color or eye color or geography. It's just a factor. And so if we're going to put it in there, just like a setting or a genre or whatever, we need to put it throughout and not just list it as a factor. Like, oh, isn't this cool? This character has cerebral palsy, or autism or deafness.
I love how you phrase that when you call it a plot device, because a lot of people do use it as a plot device, and then it just shows up like the special effects on the Star Wars, or the bad sci-fi movie, right? I think you hit it so right on the head when you say, let's make it a natural part of this person's personality, life, whatever, and work it into the story so it's part of the story, not just the flashy cool thing here and then disappears. I love how you said that. Yeah.
I think addiction is one of the biggest ones that people do that too, because they focus on the character that has the addiction, not everybody else in the family or their friends or who they're dating or that sort of thing.
Or they focus sort of on the child of the alcoholic and, the abuse that stems from it or something like that. But yeah, I agree that when it's used as a plot device, then it just kind of falls flat. Like it really turns me off to reading a book when it's just thrown in, shoehorned in like that, to make it, oh, this character has, weaknesses and flaws, so he's great or she's great, you should read it. But it has to be genuine to the character and organic to the story, or else it does fall flat, in my opinion.
So what that comes out to is some very basic advice that I think we would all give to beginning writers in every instance, which is research what you're writing about. So probably some of the writers who are using these disabilities as plot devices they don't know anybody who has them, or they don't know much about what it's like to have such a thing. So they haven't done the research, of a basic thing. They're just like trying to think of something cool. But it's just overall advice that I give is that you shouldn't be doing your fiction with high concepts, but with characters. So if your idea is, it wouldn't be cool if we suddenly discover the superhero is a psychopath. Instead, you think about who is that superhero as a person, or whoever it is, not a superhero, and develop the characters instead of thinking, oh, wouldn't it be cool if? Because it's only cool if it's well written.
Yeah. Or if you're going to go with that, wouldn't it be cool if you do that in the outlining stage and then you do a ton of research and you figure out how it actually affects your character and the story you're trying to tell, and then integrate it in before you've actually started writing the story, instead of saying,
Exactly. Yeah.
I need some new thing to make my character's life a little harder. Let's give him, roll the D20 to figure out a disability or something.
Right. And the research really cannot be watching a movie or a TV show that's got a character that's got a disability, because most of those are completely false or wrong or incomplete also. One of the biggest ones that bugs me is the superhero in Daredevil. He suddenly develops this super hearing where he can actually see where things are by hearing the raindrops. That's, you don't automatically develop special other senses when you lose one. So you don't increase in something else because you lost something.
Yeah.
Really
Did the show take out the radiation leak that gave him the powers?
They don't play that up, especially in the movie. So if you want to play that up or explain it that way, but in the movie and in the later comic books, they don't show it that way. It's just like he has this because he's blind.
Yeah.
And something along that line, also when doing research, don't only rely on the internet. I'm sure, EM, if you've ever done research on bipolar disorder, which I'm sure you have, you got maybe—
I have several books.
20, 25, at most 50% of the big picture from all the articles you read online.
Well, that and having it myself, so yeah.
But I mean, like when you were researching it initially, the internet can only provide you with so much. You actually have to talk to doctors. You have to talk to people who are—
and take meds
with these diseases or with disorders or whatever, talk to the friends and family. For example, for this PTSD story, I talked not only to people with PTSD, but the wives or the husbands or friends, and, to get a really well-rounded picture, not just what I read on WebMD or the Mayo Clinic, because, you can only get so much research. Those scholarly articles are great, but they are not going to say, my 6'6" husband who bench presses 300 pounds is curled up in a ball on the sofa because he heard someone speaking Arabic in the TV show. You know, like, you don't get that from research. You have to actually talk to people. You have to call experts. You have to, you know, interact with psychologists, therapists. Like, the more well-rounded the information you get, the more accurate your characters. Very good. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thank you guys so much for joining in. It was awesome to have you.
Thank you.
Thank
A lot
you.
of fun. Thanks, as always.
If you guys want to find out more about Matt, Mary, Kelly, Spencer, EM, check out the links below in the comments and find out more about their awesome books. Thank you guys so much. Have an awesome day.